Well, good morning, everyone. You have reached the Spy Who Loves Liberty this morning on the Cerberus Radio Network. I'm your host, Gregory Junk Bond Carpenter, in studio at a remote location somewhere in the hinterlands of Neverland is our buddy Booger, and the producer who produces more production than all other producers combined, Jeff I Can Do It All Johnson, behind the controls at the Cerberus Radio Network this morning. Good morning. Boy, now wasn't that some great introduction music? When's the last
Impressive.
time you heard the Hungarian Rhapsody #5? I mean, come on. Jeff, thank you for pulling that out. That's one of my favorites, by the way.
I figured he'd play Eminem or something, but oh well.
I couldn't find any Jay-Z that was copyright free.
Well, maybe we can get Eminem's version of the Hungarian Rhapsody #5.
That would be interesting.
I would pay double for that action, Cotton, big time. Well, here we are this morning, and don't forget you can pick us up. We are live on the YouTube. We are putting together our website right now as we speak. Things are being populated. It'll be socialized with the rest of the folks out there most soon once we have everything ready and put together. And I flip the switch and it becomes live. But until then, we're just populating and populating and populating. You got us on the Facebook and you got us radio.co. And my gosh, where else are we on, Jeff?
Twitter. They can find us on Twitter.
Twitter, okay.
And actually, we're on a couple other social media platforms that I don't even know. I just share us there because it gives me the option. So, and I've never seen anyone on them anyway, because there must be like 5 people on those social media platforms. I've never seen anyone else there.
Oh, that's awesome. So we might be the ones to bring those social media platforms to life. I like it. So this morning we have Booger, as I said, in the hinterlands of Neverland, and it's not the same Neverland as Michael Jackson. Don't confuse these.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Booger goes to bed with his boots on. Okay, he's not. Yeah. So we wanted to discuss something that is exceedingly unknown, and I don't want to say relatively unknown. I want to say exceedingly unknown throughout history, often misconstrued, and always misunderstood and misinterpreted. So I want people to pay close attention today because Booger and I are going to have a great discussion about the history of the Jewish people, the Crusades, and we're going to talk about Islam and how that all worked out with the Crusades and some of the important people and some of the atrocities committed during this period and the complete misunderstanding, I would call it, of history itself. So, Booger, I'll let you start a little bit so people can get an understanding of where we're going. And it's not just the Crusades we're going to talk about today, folks, but there's some deep-seated history that's embedded in the Crusades that sets the stage for everything else that we don't understand, because we're going to bring this up. We're going to start here. I think this is the best place to start so that we can bring it forward. And eventually we're going to start talking about the New Zealand shooter and talk about what happened there and his manifesto and things like that. So we're going to kind of bring this full circle from a historical perspective up into a contemporary setting to help you understand the cultural issues, the religious issues, and pretty much fill in all of the blank spaces that people will have that they really thought things were one way, but in fact, it turns out it was just the opposite. So what I'd like to do, Booger, do you want to start? We could talk about maybe some of the history of the Jewish people in the Crusades, and maybe start with the siege of Jerusalem.
Yeah, and
Is that okay?
just
Yeah.
yes, on a blanket statement on it, religion, when it comes to making war, it's old faithful. Okay, that's the bottom line. You want to start a war, involve religion in it, and it's going to be old faithful. It's going to get you that war. And on the Crusades, so many people, we've got this thing. Oh, Islam hates Judaism. Judaism hates Islam. Christianity was the liberating force. Now, we're not defending or attacking any religion. We're just explaining how it's been used, okay, on this, and how people have been deceived by it. And they pick and choose from the Bible, the Quran, everything else. The best lie is made up of facts assembled in a misleading manner.
That's
Yeah.
that's probably the best way to put it. To be very honest with you, it's the perfect deception to put a bunch of quasi truths together with lies and make it an organized. Uh, what would I call it? I don't want to say document because just make it an organized process of thought that people can subscribe to. Religion has always been the emotional aspect of society. It's not the logical. I'm going to go to the logical aspect. You're going to talk science. Uh, you want to go to emotional. You're going to talk music, the arts, because those are things that internally connect with people. How many people can sit there and listen to the Hungarian Rhapsody #5 and not see Bugs Bunny playing the piano on stage during one of the Looney Tunes cartoons. I mean, come on, that brings back memories for old folks like me and Booger and everybody else who's works here at the station for sure. I'll tell you that right now. But and again, like the William Tell Overture, right? You hear that and you think in your head, "Hi ho, silver away." It has a memory that's an emotional memory. Science is logical. It's completely the opposite. It's the contrary of what we feel. So to get people riled up, you have to actually connect with the emotional support that they look to. And by invoking some type of a religious cause, you're actually invoking an emotional response from people, which is much greater than a logical response. You can measure the difference, the physiological difference in a person by invoking an emotional response, which is one of the reasons why, even though scientifically unfounded, uh, the lie detectors, the polygraphs are given to people just for a baseline of what they're experiencing or what they're feeling. Scientifically, it's not there, but it'll show you emotional responses in people if they're not a sociopath. If you're a sociopath, you don't have any responses whatsoever to anything. But non sociopaths all do fall within a normal limit when given a polygraph. So there is a response that's there. Now, whether or not it's truthful or a lie, which is the problem with the polygraph, no one can tell. It's 51% accurate. So that's like, what, flipping a coin.
Pretty well. Pretty well.
But it can tell you if somebody has an emotional response versus a logical response because physiologically the functions that it measures will have some type of a reading above the normal baseline. So that's where we're coming at from all this. Religion, it invokes the emotional side of people, whereas science and things of that nature, mathematics, that invokes the logical side, that invokes the discussion aspect of it. If you hear Booger and I speak this morning, you're going to hear not emotion, you'll hear passion in what we're sharing with you because we want you to understand that we've delved in this for many, many, many years. We have tremendous background in this stuff, And we want to impart it to everyone else out there because it really is that important. You're being lied to and you're being tricked. It is part of, and I'm not going to say this grand scheme of things, but there are people that are pulling the strings on how we live our lives every day. That's how they get rich. That's what they do. And so to come back again, back to the beginning, please understand that we're trying to give you the scientific, the facts of what happened. No conjecture. There'll be emotion attached to it because it is pretty important stuff, but you're not going to hear that emotional connection. We don't have that. We're not those types of guys. I'm sorry. If you're looking for some type of emotional psychotic radio, you're not going to get it today. You're going to get an intellectual discussion.
Yes, and it's like our whole point, like we were talking before we did the show yesterday, what is actually going on right now with all of this war, and then we'll get into the history of the Quran, the Crusades, all this, but kind of bottom line up front, maybe I think, is we are witnessing an engineered clash of cultures that is being sold to us as a religious war. That is,
there it is. Yeah.
Yeah, there it is. That is exactly what's going on it. Because I'll tell you what, I worked in Albania for 3 years, an Islamic country. It's not religious based. These people's behavior that's disrupting Western society. Not to mention that we destroyed their entire country before we brought all of these middle-aged males over here from many countries where they don't even use toilet paper yet, and we just drop them in large groups where they can create a subculture in the very countries that destroyed their culture. And you would have to be insane not to right up front say, whoa, there is going to be some major unrest with the clash of these cultures. Because one of the best sites I found on this is muslimtenets.com, where you can get in and actually see what the Quran says about treating non-believers with great respect, how they're supposed to treat people in conquered lands with great respect, never defile any places of worship. Total 180 from the way these people are behaving from these third world cultures that are being thrown into Western cultures. And I mean, you really look at it, the countries we've destroyed are probably about like Europe was in the medieval time period, okay, or the Dark Ages. They really and truly are that far back. And you look during that time period, Christianity was being used as an excuse by the elites to consolidate power and start wars. And they were burning people, they were burning women at the stake. Who knows how many thousands of women were burnt at the stake in the name of the Christian religion as witches. So that's, just a little bit of the bottom line up front. Go ahead, brother.
Yeah, that's great. No, I appreciate it. So we're going to start back and give a little background of the First Crusade and what happened. And this kind of sets the stage. So before the Crusades actually kicked off, the Christians and Jewish people in Europe mostly lived together. They intermingled together. There was no superior religion that was more dominant. They considered each other as equals. They traded with each other. They had stores next to each other. They lived in each other's communities. There was no segregation, anything like that, which is probably one of those things that most people have never even heard of before. They believed that all of Europe was 100% Christian and that's the way it started. Well, that's not the way it started. It was completely different than that. And to see when things change, you have to go to the German Crusade of 1096, which is the first crusade. And then how much worse it got during the Second Crusade in 1147. As a matter of fact, the Jews in France, they suffered terribly, terribly. Philip Augustus treated them severely in the Third Crusade of 1189, I want to say 1188, I think it was. And they were subjected to horrific attacks in Europe during the Shepherd's Crusades of 2050 and 1320. So it didn't start like that. It became bad. Why did it become bad? Why did we end up with this huge disparity between Christianity and Judaism?
Sorry.
Choo-choo.
Yeah, sorry about that. Let me get that back up. Hold on. I was reading the Muslim thing. Okay, well, shoot, I've lost my cursor.
Oh, well then you won't be able to curse.
I got it.
No problem. No problem. So what happened? Why did this all change? So let's go back to the First Crusade, if we would. It started when the Crusaders left from the siege of Antioch in June 1098. They stayed there for a while, and then they started to move towards Jerusalem. Now, there was some issues that they faced. It was hot because it's the Middle East. They had little to no food. Their numbers were dwindling. I mean, seriously dwindling. They had started with an army of over 30,000 infantry or so. And by the time they ended up at the siege of Jerusalem, they were down to maybe 11,000 or so. I mean, it was really that bad. And the only way they were actually able to take Jerusalem was from the kingdom of Genoa. Two ships arrived and they dismantled the ships and were able to build siege towers. Now, one of the towers was destroyed as they were trying to break into Jerusalem, and the other one made it, and they were able to take Jerusalem. Now, here's the interesting part of this. Before they came under Muslim rule, and Jerusalem had just been reconquered like a year or so before that by the Muslims, but under the Muslim rule, the Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims all lived together in peace in Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a rather peaceful city. And I know that's going to come as a shock to many people. Before the Crusaders established the kingdom of Jerusalem under Crusade control, it was peaceful there. It was a pretty safe place to be. The walls of Jerusalem were pretty doggone strong. As a matter of fact, the Crusaders had been repelled on a previous attempt to conquer the city, and they found out that, well, without food and water, and it's kind of hard to beat the fatigue and conquer a city where the walls are tremendous and you have no other way to get in. We don't want you to think that it was a perfect place to be, because it wasn't perfect, but it was relatively safe and people did live in harmony. And we have, and let me go down over here to my reference list. If you look at there's a book, it's called Our Hands Are Stained with Blood, the tragic story of the, quote, church and the Jewish people, was published. It's a college book that's used for teaching world history. It was published in 92, chock full of information on what happened. And one of the most interesting things that happened during the Jerusalem massacre in July 1099, once the Crusaders took the city, the Christians had been sent out because the Muslim leader didn't want any collusion or anything like that. So it was just the Jewish people and the Muslims defending the city together against the Crusaders. Now, let that sink in for a minute. Let that sink in. Also, another good reference, the church and the Jews in the Middle Ages. I think you'll find a lot of very interesting historical information in there, linked back to some of the earliest texts of what happened. Uh, uh, the author S.D. Goitein, also Goitein, uh, has put together some of the earliest records of what happened, contemporary letters on the capture of Jerusalem by the Crusaders. And one of the accounts of what happened was written only 2 weeks after the capture of Jerusalem. That makes it the earliest text of the account. And in that text, it explains how the Jews and Muslims fought together to repel the Crusaders. In one section of the city, the Jewish people defended it pretty much by themselves. In other sections, they fought side by side together against the Crusaders. And then later on in the text, you'll see where the synagogue was burned to the ground by the Crusaders. Some accounts say that most of the Jewish people were inside, uh, seeking shelter, knowing that they would die, and if they were going to die, they wanted to be in the temple. Other accounts say that they could not see any of the Jews in the temple itself. They couldn't rule it out, but they didn't. They didn't see any. Um, Now, this is completely contrary to what we're taught about in the Crusades. We're taught that, the Crusaders came and freed Jerusalem. Jerusalem didn't want to be saved. The Jews, the Christians, and the Muslims were all living together quietly and peacefully. Another book that talks about um, some of the intricacies and some of the things that happened is the Deeds of the Franks, which is an ancient book. Has a clear bias that's towards the Byzantines, and you see later on that how the distrust of the Byzantines, which is what led to the Fourth Crusade, where they went and sacked the Byzantine Empire, Constantinople. The Crusaders went out and destroyed Constantinople. That's
Oh
Eastern
yeah.
Christianity. I mean, come on, they were just out to conquer. This didn't really have. They use, again. We're making the point that religion has been used and not necessarily in a good way. It's used as a reason to go out and conquer. So there was nothing that and you can go back and you can get. I think you can get it at Gutenberg.org. The Deeds of the Franks. It's an old, historical text, and it talks about how the Western Christians hated the Eastern Christians and a lot of the intricacies of how things went down. But again, it spelled bad news for the Jewish people. So let's go back a second, back to the siege of Jerusalem, and it was at that point when the wholesale slaughter of the Muslims and Jews in the city happened, when word got out that the Jews back in Europe started to be treated differently. And then Booger, I'll let you jump in on some of the atrocities and how that went down there.
Oh yeah, you can. Now these are accounts that I've gotten online and found, and yes, tracked it down. They were taken from original source documents, which you always want to track down. You always want to look at translators' credentials. So you get into all that to validate what you're reading. But we're talking battle-hardened knights that had been through who knows how many conflicts in Europe. They go down there, they participate in the taking of Jerusalem, but yet they are in their personal writings seriously emotionally disturbed at the slaughter of the Muslims and the Jews that they were ordered to do in Jerusalem after they took it. I mean, you can get on there and they just talk about how the blood was running in the streets, dragging women and children out of houses, beheading beheading them. And perfect example, nowhere in the Bible is that taught that that's Christian behavior. Okay. Likewise, you go to the Quran, you will find nowhere in there that the book will condone the type of behavior that ISIS is conducting right now. You will not find it in the Quran. There's so many mistranslations, not just total falsehoods, like that thing of, I forget how many virgins they said they get, when they die. It's just absolutely not in the Quran. When a martyr dies, it's not in there. But I mean, it was pretty horrific. I'm trying to remember all the details on it, but I mean, just people begging for their lives, women and children, and they were just being drug out in the streets and executed wholesale.
Right. So some were Raymond of what was his name? Raymond of Bertrand. I think it was Raymond of Bertrand. I don't remember exactly, but one of the leaders specifically attempted several times to shelter some of the women and children and some of the Jewish people from the others who were on this slaughter campaign, pretty much. Sometimes successfully, other times not so successfully. They had them held up in the Temple of Solomon, I think it was. Raymond of Toulouse, that was it. I'm just looking up here. Raymond of Toulouse. So it really became a bloodfest, if you want to put it that way. Like if you're thinking of one of the 1960s splat films, is what they were called, right? These horror films, terror films that just came out because the Hays Code, the moral code for producing movies in Hollywood, was just repealed. So they came out with all of these shock type movies in the late 60s. And these are the ones where, you would put a knife in somebody and the blood would shoot 10 feet or so. Well, back during the First Crusade and the siege of Jerusalem, once the Crusaders captured Jerusalem and put everybody to the sword, and I say everybody because some accounts say everyone was killed. Other accounts, which are more prevalent from some of the eyewitnesses, say that small groups were saved, and then partially due to Raymond of Toulouse, who was able to protect them over at I think it was the Dome of the Rock, and there was a temple there also. But it really became a bloodbath. In some places, the eyewitness accounts say the blood ran up past their ankles. In other places, the legs of the Crusaders on horseback, the knights themselves, were so covered with blood that they were soaked with blood. The bodies had to be taken out of Jerusalem and stacked in pyramids for a funeral pyre immediately, because the stench of flesh was so great you barely could stay within the walls of Jerusalem because the bloodshed was so immense. This is done under the name of Christ. And of course, this is obviously not a religious thing. According to the Bible, as Booger mentioned, your job is to not go out and wholesale slaughter people because one group took over a city. That's not what you do. I don't remember ever in the Bible reading where Jesus took up a sword and attacked people. I know where Peter took a sword and cut part of the ear of one of the arresting officers of Jesus off, and then Jesus took his hand and put it over there and fixed it again, put his ear back. So violence is definitely not the way, and you don't read that in Quran. As a matter of fact, you don't read that in any major world religion as the way to go. But yet here we are And at this point, they've killed nearly every single person within the walls of Jerusalem. And it didn't matter if they were Jewish or Muslim, or if there happened to be someone there who was Christian. We'll never know. We were told that the Christians were sent out, but you don't know if all of them were sent out. The text that I referred to that was written 2 weeks after the incident said that you couldn't find. How did he write it? I'm going to go back and look at my text. I don't want to say it wrong because I don't want to be as Booger has said before. Getting it right is the most important part. Getting the truth is the most important part. Many of them were thrown into the sea or beheaded along the way. And here, a pocketful or a small group of Jews were ransomed and liberated by the summer of 1100. The few who could not be rescued, were either converted to Christianity or killed. Now, here comes a force that nobody asked for. Nobody in the city really wanted them to come. Nobody needed them to come, but it was their own personal needs. They raised the money, they got these armies, they marched these armies thousands of miles to come to a city that didn't want them to implement. I mean, this is like stuff out of a storybook, right, Booger?
Yes. And this is one of those things when you get into what may have been, I want you to know, like I was saying, may have been the reason for the Crusades is the vast amount of wealth that was hidden in Jerusalem before it fell to the Romans. Okay. And the Knights Templar was very poor organization until they got control of the Temple Mount and started excavations.
And then they started their international banking.
Yes. Okay.
Which is where the term bank comes from, folks. When they crossed over the river to leave the country, they would check their stuff with the Knights Templar, who charged them a fee to keep track of all their items so nobody would steal their items or nothing would happen. So in the event that they were to return, then they would pay a fee and all of their worldly possessions were kept safe at the bank of the river by the Knights Templar. And of course, if they didn't return, well, then the Knights Templar got to keep everything. It's typical of a banking scheme today. Go ahead, Booger. I'm sorry.
No, but you know what's funny on that? Friday the 13th, when I believe wasn't it King Philip took down the Knights Templar?
On the Friday the 13th, right. That's
yes.
Right. Okay. He called them all in. And, yep.
Yeah, it should be a day of good luck. Okay. Right. Because that was when somebody finally crushed what was becoming the international banking cartel, lending money at interest, which, I mean, that should be absolutely illegal because that has led to more enslavement. This is just my personal view of the human race. Lending money at interest is the core tool of enslavement that I see today.
Oh yeah, which is something that's interesting because in the Bible refers to it as usury.
Yes,
and of course, even the Christians today are told not to get involved with usury, but for some reason, everybody's doing it.
Well, in Deuteronomy, I think it is the
Deuteronomy.
Deuteronomy. The Jews are allowed to lend to the goyim in usury. Right. Okay. But the Quran strictly prohibits lending money at interest to anyone at any time.
Yeah, which is another interesting change in how people would think about what's really going on. That's not something you're told about all the time.
Yeah. And you can get into studying the history of the Muslim conquest. And yes, there were some Islamic commanders that did some slaughters. But what's interesting is when you dig deeper, you'll find out that they had signed a peace treaty and then they ended up rebelling against that commander that they signed a peace treaty with, and he would get fairly upset and then do some more or less Roman style decimation. Yeah, yes. It's when you get that, somebody throws you that snapshot of history out. Okay, this commander that took this city during the Muslim conquest did this horrible thing to the people. And then when you start going deeper, oh, wait a minute, they had signed a surrender agreement, all of this, and then they went and did this, and this resulted in this. So it's not just a simple thing of a human being going in there and just wanting to slaughter people. There was always, it seemed like, extenuating circumstances.
Yeah, that's a good point. So again, we're not here defending one religion over another. Don't get that in your mind. What we're doing is highlighting the misuse of religion to cover over what has become uh, the striving for global conquest by destroying culture. That's what's really happening. So let's so now that we've set the stage a little bit, we've given you a little background on how these divisions were initially started. Let's fast forward a little bit, and you want to pick it up again, Booger?
Yeah. And this is the thing on this. When you look at what's going on today, I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit. That what I see on this thing is, and you and I talked about this yesterday, all of this destruction of these third world countries that have Islam as a religion it's a designed, it's partially, if you get in and research plan for a greater Israel, it's to destabilize that area. Then I think a secondary effect coming off of that is you get refugees. Hey, never let a good crisis go to waste, right? We've got a refugee crisis. Okay. We created the refugee crisis, but now that we've gotten it, let's take these people and introduce them into Western cultures, the very ones that destroyed their culture. And I mean, you can Google Irish rape gangs, Mexican rape gangs, Chinese rape gangs. Anytime throughout history where you have taken a large number of military age males and put them in large enough numbers where they can form a subculture in another culture where the women will shun them. Local people do not want to give them work, okay, because their less thans are just not understood. You're going to have a lot of nefarious activity. It is human nature. That's it.
Yeah, that's true. And so, folks, don't think that we're not naive to the fact that some different different types of Islam say that you're allowed to lie to people that are non-believers to get your way and things like that. These are additional things that, yes, we know they're out there. Yes, we know that every religion has its own way, I guess I would say, of trying to implement their control over other religions. Because at the end of the day, what's the bottom line for anybody running a religion? And it is people that run religions, right? Don't okay, it's inspired by God. Yeah, I understand all that, but people here on earth run religions. And we'll just take an example here just for one. Okay, again, we're not picking on anybody, but this is highly organized, so this is easier to highlight than some of the others, right? The Catholic Church is a good example. Now, again, not picking on them, just pointing out where does all the money go? The money goes back to the Holy See, or all the control for money and everything like that. It's a highly organized religion run by men. That's what is happening. Yeah, and you could say inspired by God and all this. Okay, I get it. I understand. But at the end of the day, God's not here sitting in, the money house counting the gold pieces that come into the Vatican or that come in, to the National Cathedral over here in Washington, D.C. That's not God doing that. That's men doing that. It happens with every religion. It is an organized, tax-exempt business from that aspect of it. They're providing you a service. They're providing you a place to go where you can have, quote, a church or a group of people gathering together to worship, some existential being. And they're providing you the fellowship. They're providing you emotional support, all these types of things. That's their product. Again, it's a business. And don't get me started on, how tax exempt organizations got started by the Rockefellers and stuff back in the 30s to help them out, to help themselves out. Don't get me started on all that. But so the point of it is that religions are a business where men bring money in because they ask you for your offerings, your donations, and each of the religious books of the major religions tells you that you have to give them money, right? So there you go. There's your business plan right there. The whole thing is one of these religious books. Now, again, please don't misconstrue. We're not picking on any one religion. We're not saying that religion doesn't have a place in society. It doesn't have a purpose. All the emotional people out there are throwing their hands up in the air right now, Booger, saying, "Oh my God, he's off the deep end," right? So don't fall for that, folks. Just listen for a moment. Okay, you're being provided a service, and you're paying them your what's it, a tithe, your gift, whatever it is. You're paying for that service, whatever that service is worth to you. That's what you're getting. Now, couple of religions that don't talk about that at all are Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism. Just off the top of my head, I can think that they don't tell you have to give them money, but you do have to offer up your mind, your heart, your soul, and meditate together and work for the furtherance of spiritual enlightenment together, which may mean that you have to throw some cash into, I guess. I don't know. But don't misconstrue religion and culture. And this is the point that Booger's making here. It's a very important point. If you're just joining us, I don't do this enough, but if you're just joining us now, we're 45 minutes into the show. Look at this. You're listening to The Spy Who Loves Liberty with Gregory Junkbomb Carpenter and Booger on the side here. And we're about to get to our point about the New Zealand Manifesto, the New Zealand Shooter Manifesto, and what's really happening there. Booger, you want to grab that and run with that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, if you get on there, and I actually managed to, as a matter of fact, when I was calling to reconnect with all my Islamic friends that I've talked to about Islam a lot in the past, I ended up, one of my friends, Albanian friends, had the full video, and he sent it to me. The full video of the guy, and they had it in Albania. They still have freedom of press over there. Imagine that. And like I said, moonshine's legal. You don't need a prescription for anything in the pharmacy. Bars never have to close until the owner doesn't feel like he's making money anymore. Yeah, right. It's pretty free. And it's a Muslim culture. Okay. Not Muslim culture. It is a Muslim country, but their culture is not the same as another Islamic country. But he sent me the whole video. and he and I got talking. The guy, I mean, he started off communist, ended up saying he was libertarian, and identified China as like his ideal country. And I mean, you sit there and you really look at this guy. You know, this guy was all over the place on his political thing, but I think the core problem that everyone is overlooking is not, you know, he wasn't a white supremacist or anything like that. He was worried about his culture being destroyed by another culture coming in. Okay.
Mhm.
Now, he was naming it by a religion, but if you were to sit down and discuss it with him, I'm sure you would get to it. He was worried about his culture and was wanting to defend his culture.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. I mean, he points out several times throughout this whole manifesto that it is the destruction of the culture which really bothered him and unnerved him. Not so much, and of course, you have to intellectually look at and read the manifesto itself. Is everything a tagline? Every sentence in there a tagline that could be put on a meme? Yes. Is it cut and paste from a whole bunch of other stuff? Yes. So maybe he's not the most creative guy in the world, but he took all of these things together to make his point. And that's what we're talking about here. So a lot of people will take a meme and say, "Oh yeah, that's exactly how I feel today." Sure. Well, that's what this guy did. Except he took hundreds of them and he took the texts together and he put those texts into this manifesto. Now, some of the stuff he wrote himself, and you can tell, but other stuff was, you know, directly. It was definitely meme material.
Yes.
Understand the point of what he said, and the point that Booger just made is that his objection is not to Islam. His objection is to the cultural decay in New Zealand and the destruction of his way of life. He's not ready for that change. He doesn't want that change. Now, is it because of his perception of Islam or his perception of the people that have moved into New Zealand? Or is it based on some factual information that we don't know? But we do know that he definitely did not like the fact that they had taken and put a mosque in a place where a church was. And I want to highlight this for a second because this is actually important. This kind of speaks to what we're talking about. When people of Islam faith come into a location, they'll take and they will. And some people say that it's because you know, they're showing that they're taking over their superiority, whatever. They'll take and they'll turn them into mosques. Well, don't Christians do the same thing? Don't if they conquer a place, don't they take over the most important place and make that their seat of government? Of course they do. They do it all the time. It's human conquest. That's what Christians have done. So in Islam, you do it from the religious aspect. In Christianity, you do it from the government aspect. Is government your religion? It could be. So, first point. Second point, if they come in and people, Muslims, if they come in and they turn a church into a mosque, is that not already identifying that your culture has been destroyed internally by your people because the people who used to own the church are willing to sell it? Why? Because they don't have the membership. They don't generate enough revenue to keep the place open and running. So, isn't that an internal problem in that country already, where the culture has started to destroy itself as opposed to being destroyed externally.
Yes. Bringing up Albania one more time on this, their dictator over there, Hosha, he tore down every church and every mosque. And he built identical buildings side by side, had the same number of Muslims, same number of Christians helping each other build the buildings. The only difference was one would have a cross and the other one have a crescent moon. He said religion will not divide our country any longer. And I'll tell you what, it is one of the most homogeneous countries I've ever been in, cultural wise, because he eliminated that division. He did not eliminate religion, he eliminated the division created by it.
Yeah, the perception, right. The perception of difference, right, that people have with religion. And yes, it is a dividing factor, superficially. Deeper, it's always the cultural issue itself. Superficially, people look at it and go, "Oh yeah, that's because you got Jews living with the Muslims and stuff, and that's going to be a horrible." No, hold on. Back the truck up for a second here. Let's look at the complete issue involved here. Is it because they worship on different days? Is it because no? Is it because they believe different things? Not really. They, most everything is the same. There are differences, yes, then there are profound differences. But does that not lead you to the same emotional response, the same emotional type of a linkage to where you're going? And again, folks, not just Muslims and Jews, not just Christians, not just Janists, not just Buddhists, okay? Don't get hung up with, thinking that we're picking on one religion over another. And it's not a denominational issue in Islam, where we call them sects, right? Different sect of Islam, but we have denominations of Christianity.
Yeah, they're sects.
I mean, come on. Realistically, okay, it's your flavor of your religion, okay, whatever you want to call it, be it Episcopalian, Anglican, Catholic, LDS, whatever you want it to be, okay, Methodist, it doesn't matter, right? It's still a version of Christianity, and it still falls into the big category of religion where you have very similar goals. You have different inputs from each of the different books that you revere. However, the output on the back end is all the same. You read, you meditate, you do whatever you need to do. And on the back end, have you gotten your money's worth for what you put into that session? And that's the bottom line right there. So you're very limited in scope with religion as far as what really can be problematic about it. If you look at religion holistically by itself like that. Now, if you look at culture and say, just like all the refugees that come up, they don't even have toilet paper in many places of where the refugees came from. They don't have running water. They don't have water that you can drink out of the tap. And some second world nations don't have that. And a lot of that, and we can get into that another day, but a lot of that's due to what we've done around the world too. And our mishaps, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of places don't even have these things. And you're going to take these folks and you're going to drop them into a completely different cultural setting and expect them to pick up the norms of that culture. They're not going to do it. They're going to do exactly what Booger said. They're going to isolate themselves in a little subculture. This is how New York City was, right? New York City was supposed to be the great melting pot. What happened? Well, you got Chinatown, you got Little Italy, you have all these subcultures all over New York City of groups of people that did not integrate. They didn't pick up the culture of New York City at the time. right? Back with the first big group of people that stood out that nobody wanted anything to do with were the Irish.
Oh yeah, I'm Irish on both sides,
So
so I
those
know what you're talking about.
well, so it's Booger's fault, right? And his ancestors. Those bastards wouldn't even speak English,
Nope.
right?
You know what was hilarious too was the Irish always tend to be gangsters and cops. You know, they kind of went
Right, the
to the two
extremes.
extremes. Yes.
Yeah, very few merchants
Yeah.
there, right?
Yes. It wasn't in the Irish genetic structure to do
Well,
that.
actually,
No.
actually, there's three. You had the gangsters, the cops, and then priests. Those
You
are the
are
three
correct.
groups of
Yes.
Irish.
Those three
actually.
groups. Yeah. What a wild, I mean, just a hard, line between the Irish. And the thing is, all three groups would sit down at the same dinner table on a big family reunion. That's what the hilarious thing is.
That's
Yeah.
right. And you'd never discuss
Oh,
business.
Yeah, you wouldn't discuss business, not that I'm trying to throw the guy across from the table from me in jail. Yeah, we wouldn't cover. Oh, one thing I wanted to cover real quick,
Yeah.
so that I'm not misquoted on a thing I said, and I actually I did put it out wrong, saying that nowhere in the Quran will you find the current behavior of ISIS justified. It would be no different than the Bible. Okay. For example, if you tried to use the account of the Battle of Jericho in the Old Testament for laying siege to Tehran and killing every man, woman, child, and animal inside, okay, you can find places in the Quran that you could interpret, okay, this horrible stuff was done, okay, so we can do it now. So just getting into the thing on that is there are accounts of bad things happening in every religious book. But what the people that want to use the religion to manipulate the masses, they use that as an excuse to repeat the atrocities.
Yep, they certainly do. And that's interestingly enough, that brings us full circle back to the Crusades, because that's exactly what Peter the Hermit said to the Crusaders. He got them all whipped up into a frenzy out there in the desert while they were getting ready and contemplating whether or not they were going to attack again. And he claimed that he had been visited by the Abmahar. That was his name, Abmahar, the papal legate for the Crusades, who had died. He had typhus back at the siege of Antioch, so he was dead. But Peter the Hermit claimed that he saw him and said that taking Jerusalem would be similar to the Battle of Jericho.
Yes.
And he instructed the guys to walk around the city with bare feet so they could take Jerusalem in the same manner that Jericho was taken. And folks, there you go, full circle, right back to the Crusades again. I was having a discussion online, of course, on Twitter with some guy who professed that he was some historical guru or something, and said that things are what they seem. You're just making more of this than what's really there. And I got to tell you,
Oh,
folks,
yeah. Okay.
yeah, things aren't what they seem. They really aren't. You need the truth. You come here to Cerberus Radio Network, and you sit in with the spy who loves liberty and Booger one day, and I'm going to tell you, you're going to learn more than you ever thunk you ever wanted to know. So for all of us here at the Cerberus Radio Network, we want to say thank you for stopping in with us today. You have yourself a great day, Booger. Always great to talk to you.
Likewise, brother. Now I got to go to the bank.
You're good. Oh, good man. Go visit the Knights Templar. Jeff, thank you for being Mr. Production Expert. And folks, we're out of here. We will see you again soon. And we love you all. You take care.